Shalom and welcome to Wisdom in Torah Ministries. Now that I regained my voice, now I'm able to get back and do my weekly classes with Professor Mark Chavalas. As long as he is available, he is more than happy to meet with us and talk about the ancient Near East in light of Scripture, or in this case, his expertise is Mesopotamia and Ugarit, some of the areas in the ancient Near East. And we have the great opportunity to learn from someone who has been actually is an editor of great works of education, scholarly work for ancient Near Eastern history and also Bible. So I'm happy to have Professor Chavalas. How are you, sir? Nice to
I
have you
am
again.
doing well and glad to hear that your voice is back. That's for sure.
Little by little keeps coming in.
That's great.
Hey, what's the deal with Juan Soto, man? He just went to the Mets like that. He
Well,
didn't go to the Dodgers?
the more I think about him, he's really a four-tool player. He's not a great fielder. And so
Uh-huh.
I'm going to guess within 5 or 6 years, he's going to have to be only a DH. So maybe you dodged a bullet over there in the other side of New York.
Maybe they did, because I tell you, when Judge is no longer able to play outfield, he's going right to first.
Yeah. And or DH. So who
Yeah.
knows?
I don't
Um,
know, man. There's no way, in my opinion, no baseball players worth $700 million. That's ridiculous. And I
well,
used to be a professional ball player, and I
yes.
tell you, there's no way. That's crazy. That's a lot of money. I mean, can you
It's
realize you hurt a nail and you can't play for a week? They don't
yeah.
want to mess you up.
I and when I do have some leisure, I'll read some books about old time players. And so they were complaining about making $2,500
Yeah,
100 years ago or 3,000. And so I'm thinking, okay, it's okay. We're all right now,
that's crazy.
and if people want to give them that much money, I guess, more power to them.
For sure. Well, thank you again for meeting with us. And I
Of
know you're
course.
busy and you're making time out of your week to teach us, and I'm very grateful. Let's talk about the Ugarit. You call it, what do you call it?
Well, I anglicize it to Ugarit. So
Ugarit.
either one is fine.
Yeah, let me give a little bit of background for the audience so they get an idea what we're talking about.
Yeah,
Um, the Ugarit, Ugarit is actually an area. Let me read it here. I go back. I was reading an article on this just
sure.
to make sure, give you a little background. I'm reading from the Anchor Yale Bible Dictionary.
Yeah.
The Tel Ras Shamra. Did you do any digging there?
No, but since it is in Syria, as a young archaeologist, we had a chance in 1979. It was the 50th anniversary of the beginning of excavations there, and so we were inland at the city of Turka, and our my director Buchlati said, "Hey, if you want over the weekend, we can drive over to Ugarit for the 50th anniversary conference." And so a couple of us got into the old Volkswagen uh, minibus and drove all the way to the coast, but we had no place to stay. I'll put it this way, Buchlati did, but there was 3 or 4 of us who are graduate students. And so we slept on the beach. Uh,
Okay.
yeah. And then the next morning we went to this very, very ridiculously fancy breakfast for all these highfalutin Europeans and others. And I thought, boy, we're a fish out of water. And especially
Yeah.
since we didn't, so, and what of course did they have for us? We were eating fish heads. And so I think I think I was pretty hungry. But anyway, we got to tour the mound um, of Ras Shamra and look at everything from the original excavators. So that was pretty
Oh, that's
great.
cool. That is
Yeah.
cool. Let me
Yeah.
read this paragraph and then let me ask you a few
Yes.
questions about this area. The Ugarit or Ugarit, like you say, the
Yeah.
Tel Ras Shamra near the Mediterranean coast of Syria is the site of an ancient Ugarit, capital of the kingdom of the same name that flourished in the second millennium BC. Occupied since Neolithic times, and it was abandoned around 1180 BC, with the exception of minimal later occupation. Its commercial importance was due to the rich agricultural countryside, and above all, to its port, discovered on the site of Minet al-Beida. Okay,
Yeah.
now it's interesting because the discovery in 1929, there's all kinds of text that they discovered,
Yep.
and I don't think the audience are aware that many of the texts they found, would the Nusi tablets be involved in that?
No, they're inland, but they're contemporary.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So
Yes,
they're
they're
around the same
contemporary.
time frame.
Yes,
It gives you an incredible glimpse into everyday life, specifically now that
yes,
we're studying the book of Genesis with
yeah.
Joseph and Jacob, Laban's house. I think if we disregard this research and scholarly work, many things in the book of Genesis in relationship to the story of Joseph and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is going to be limited in our understanding, I think, if we don't know it.
Oh, I absolutely. Now, Ugarit is probably not as useful as MR and Newsy in terms of daily life, but
Uh-huh.
it's really important for a lot of other reasons. But yeah, those all those areas by themselves, they're probably a little bit later than the patriarchal period in many respects, depending on how precise you want to be. But in any event, they certainly are the same general world. And of course, the people of Ugarit wrote in a language that would be, people argue whether it's Canaanite or a slightly different dialect that they just call Ugaritic, but either way, it's a West Semitic language that would be very, very close to Biblical Hebrew, either a different dialect or just a very close language. Maybe it would be like Spanish and I don't know,
Right.
Catalan or
So
something.
so all
Um,
of these languages are very pretty much same root words and stuff.
oh, absolutely. I mean, you look at Ugarit. Uh, the, I mean, I took some Ugaritic, by the way, and not a lot, but enough to realize what I don't know about it. But I mean, so many different roots. You'll have the consonants MLK,
Yeah.
L shin N for tongue. And I know the words in Akkadian. I go backwards, but I mean, but the similarities between it and Hebrew are astounding. In fact, at UCLA, if you wanted to study advanced biblical Hebrew, much of the course was studying Ugaritic texts.
Yeah.
Um,
You know that when I began to study in the what's his name? Ancient Civilizations by Sasson, right? You told
yes,
me
yeah,
that incredible. By the way, I went back to study to reread part of the Canaanites and Egyptian because I'm already getting ready for Egyptian,
all right,
Egyptology and stuff. And I learned more reviewing an article that I read a long time ago, 2012. And I went back and I picked up so many more things because of
yeah,
the last 12 years I've learned all the things. And an example, and you can help, and I wanted to ask you because this is something that you do. I asked you before we started recording from the Sundervan, which you were one of the editors here. This is the Sundervan uh, um, Illustrated Bible Commentary
right, yeah,
by John Walton. I think it's very, very good. And
yeah.
you wrote some of the articles on the prophets,
Yes,
correct?
I wasn't an editor, but I contribute some articles in it.
Correct.
Yeah,
But I was asking you before we started in regards to the story of Joseph, how the garment was so relevant in the story. I mean, the whole chapter 37 is all about Joseph's garment and how they remove the garment, then they put blood on the garment, they show the garment. I mean, the garment, the garment, the garment. So I began to look into, I asked a question, why so much emphasis on the garment? I went to a buddy of mine who's a Hebrew teacher in Jerusalem, and I asked him, at the time, he lived in Jerusalem. I asked him, what is the deal with the garment? He goes, well, we don't know. It could be long sleeve garment. It could be multicolored. It could be, different colors. The color is not the issue, is the representation of the garment. And when I was reading here on the commentary, and if you have more to add, please help us and teach us. But it says various types of clothing communicate a rank and status in society. In the ancient world, the fabrics, ornamentation, color, length, and hem all played a role in indicating a position of the wearer.
yes,
Undoubtedly, Joseph's coat, and designated authority and well in favor. So, with that being said, now that we kind of understand that, I began to look into the importance of the blue for the tassels that we are commanded to wear in the book of Numbers. And it says blue in the translation, but actually in Hebrew it says techelet, which is a particular blue that you find in the temples of Baal or Utah, Ishtar, the opening of Mesopotamian,
yeah,
um, uh, and the blue there represents anciently in the ancient world represented status and divine and royalty. I find it quite interesting.
yeah.
So, do you think that? being that the colors represent the status, also going along with what John Walton says, the garments also represent the status within the family structure.
Well, it certainly could. I don't know of any document that explains any of this, and I don't know the significance of the colors. Obviously, the blue and even more so purple is royalty.
Royalty,
But
yes.
I think in my thought about all this, and I haven't, I'll have to reread what John says about this, but um, I'm guessing that when he presents it to Joseph, it's because he's presenting him something that gives him the firstborn status.
Right. So,
And he is the
so
firstborn of his favorite wife, even though he's number 11.
you know what I learned in the Bible Lands Museum? They have
Yeah,
a whole gallery about cylinder seals and sealing. And it
right.
talks about how usually some people can use the garment, the hem, and they can
Yes,
place it as a collateral or a signature type thing.
absolutely.
So if that's the case, and they used to use seals or cylinder seals, then could it be possible then the garment of Joseph not only represented the status, but also the authority over the clan?
Yeah, I suppose if I mean, obviously he'd have to wait till his father was dead, but if
Oh, of course.
once his father's dead, he's the firstborn, so he would have the authority over the clan. And I suppose you or I probably wouldn't be too happy if our kid brother, who was probably a generation younger than us, got
Yeah.
picked to be the family head when it was something that we'd been waiting for our whole life.
Well,
But
we saw how Reuben was upset about that, by the way.
yes, right. And um, you know, the hem of the garment is really interesting because we have a number of prophetic texts from the city of Mari. So this is a little bit earlier on the Euphrates River inland, but
I'm
uh,
right here. Just I'll be back. Keep going.
so we good?
Yeah, yeah. Keep going. Keep going.
Okay, so from Mari, we have a number of prophetic texts where somebody is offering a prophecy that should be sent to the king. It's actually in a personal letter, but it's a prophetic text. And to prove it, they'll have, along with the tablet being sent, the hem of the person's garment and usually a fragment, a piece of their hair. Because, of course, if they do have an identification seal, they have to keep that, or they could make a seal impression of it. But either way, it has to be a prophet or a prophetess that might not be well known. But the hem of the garment is an identification bracelet. When we've excavated tombs, I remember at Turka, we found a number of individuals who had their identification seal right next to them at death. So whether or not uh, I'm guessing that the robe would be more of a status and maybe even a firstborn status.
Yeah.
And since we're not told, it's probably obvious to them what it is.
Right. This is the resource. You know what's interesting? You mentioned about the evidence with a piece of hair.
Yeah.
My father-in-law, who passed away about 7 years ago, he
Mm-hmm.
died about 80 something years old. He told me, he goes, I remember in Puerto Rico when they used to have a covenant and they used to give us hair. And I'm going like, that's kind of strange.
Yeah.
And I guess it comes all the way from there.
Who
I'm
knows?
reading, huh?
Who knows? Yeah.
Right. I'm reading from a guide to a collection of the Bible Lands Museum. You can only find this in the Bible Lands Museum.
Yeah.
It's probably the one of the only museums owned by one person.
That's
It was
amazing.
his own collection.
It's
It is the
incredible.
most impressive thing. Hardly anybody goes there, by the way.
Yeah.
It's crazy. But they don't like you ancient Near Eastern. I mean, us. They don't like us ancient Near Eastern people. Um, it has the whole area on the seals. Look at the color right here. Hopefully, you'll be able to see it.
Oh, yeah. That's
Yeah, it looks pretty
beautiful.
cool on the
Yeah.
cylinder seals.
Yeah.
But something that I read in their gallery. If you go on my tour, I have a tour coming up. Um, hopefully
Cool.
in the winter in Spanish in May. And but they represented authority, ownership, and protection.
Right.
You know, can you? What did you find, if any, in the Ugarit in regards to seals and the meaning of sealing for them? Let's expand a
Well,
little bit more on that topic.
yeah, I don't know much about the Ugarit seals. I know the ones were found at Turkey, but they are analogous. And so, I mean, you're probably well to do if you have a professional seal, and
Right.
you probably would wear it around your neck or on your side, just like where do we go? We go everywhere with our phone or our identification,
Correct.
information, kind of like
Yeah.
Judah in Genesis 38.
Yeah. This is right here's an example of
Yes.
a
Yeah,
clay
that's
clay.
so that's a seal. So it's been rolled.
Right.
Uh,
This is
on
from Seals and Sealing. One of the books that I found. Can't even read the title anymore.
is that
It's
on Dina Press?
uh I'll tell you right now. It's from Jerusalem. I don't remember.
Oh, from Jerusalem, right? Different.
Yeah. It's from Bible Lands Museum, Jerusalem.
Cool.
Seals and Sealing in the Ancient Near East. Proceedings from the symposium held September 2nd, 1993. They
Huh.
did a really good job. I
Yeah.
mean,
Oh, I believe it.
and they really cover a lot of the areas. And you know what's really interesting? In Judaism, when you do the Torah service, they take the hem, which in this case, the tassels, which was a
Yes.
sign of status in the ancient world, right?
Right.
And they will put the tassel in the scroll when you do the liturgy. Well, when you go back to the ancient world, and I asked a few people in Israel, what do you do that? It's just a custom, right? But
Yeah.
I found that it's more than a custom. It actually represented your status, who you are. It's basically you acknowledging that who you are, recognizes that this is to be true, like a signature type thing.
Yes.
You know, something that I think people are not aware of, Professor, is when we look at the historical thing, there are many things that are legal in nature that we never consider how important they are.
Yeah.
Like seals, right? You will
Yeah.
think a cylinder seal is meaningless, but it represented the life of the person and who he was.
Well, think about that aside, in the Joseph narrative, they go back to Judah for a chapter. And when Judah is going, when he's mourning the loss of his wife in Genesis 38, and he finds, at least he thinks he finds a prostitute on the way.
Right.
It happens to be his daughter-in-law. Um, and by the way, the reason prostitutes didn't veil themselves, but she happened to be veiled, and that's why he didn't know who it was, obviously. And so it
Right.
wasn't a custom. But so what does she ask of him? Because he's not prepared to make payment, she asks all of his identification. What does he give him? A signet ring, and what is it? A staff? I
The
now I sort of
staff.
forget, but
He gave him the keys of his whole kingdom.
basically, yes, everything. So he should have had his head examined.
Pretty
Um,
sure, pretty much.
but so the writers are giving us information anecdotally. In other words, they're helping us understand what is it that helps us understand Judah as a person, and these are these identification pieces that evidently anyone who is probably well-to-do would have. But we
Well,
even
don't you
have
think?
slaves who have those. Yeah,
Well, if sealing in the ancient world was something so significant that was a sign of ownership,
yeah,
protection, and provision, then that brings a really important message in our spiritual walk when we are sealed
yeah. Oh,
with the Holy
yes.
Spirit of God. That's really an incredible message we're getting.
That's exactly right. We are sealed with the promise, and so there's the royal seal on it. By the way, we have um, some documents from the Hittite land that are written to the uh, from Ugarit to the Hittites, and we even have a one that's a marriage. It has the royal seal in the middle of the envelope of the tablet, and even a divorce contract where you have the royal seal. So it's just like a presidential seal. Oh my goodness,
Right.
it's from the president. I better read it. Or what have you. So now in the Bible, of course, what is interesting about this, they talk about these things, but they're not using clay tablets there, although um, so I'm not exactly sure what's going on. Ugarit rather is unique, by the way, because they had all sorts of different types of writing. It's kind of like a trade center. So though we don't find any Egyptian, we evidently there are lots of Egyptians living there. Hurrians are living there.
Yeah.
People from Cyprus, Hittites, Mesopotamians, Ugaritians, Canaanites. By the way, the people of Ugarit disassociate themselves from the people in the south who are called from Canaan. I suppose it'd be the same way if I'm from South America and I can't tell the difference between a person from the U.S. and a person from Canada. The Canadians are going to say, "Wait a minute, no,
Right.
we're really different." Don't lump us together. We want to keep our own identity. And so Ugarit keeps its own identity, but they're writing in different, they're the first one that we know of to use an alphabetic script in cuneiform.
Oh, that's cool.
And that's more than half of the text, couple thousand of those texts. In fact, and so they're using their language for that, but the scribes are all also writing in typical Sumerian and Akkadian cuneiform. And it's interesting, they'll use that for legal documents, so they write them in Akkadian and
Yeah.
some administrative text, but everything else is written with this alphabetic cuneiform, which we only know of being used at Ugarit from around 1400 down to their fall in 1180. By the way, they didn't abandon their city; they were destroyed
Yeah.
by the Sea Peoples.
Yeah.
Uh,
Let me show a map here real quick. Because
yeah,
I kind of want the audience because you made basically what you describe is like geographically speaking, it was a very important place
yes,
because of its location. So let me
right on the coast. Yeah,
right, let me share that here. So at least the audience can see why it was so significant to control that area. Just like as you and I know, the crescent felt fertile ancient Near East. The reason why Israel was
yeah,
so important is because it was the bridge between Asia and Africa.
yeah,
So same thing goes to Ugarit right here. I
yeah.
mean, talk about one being the crossroads
It's in
of
the
ancient society.
crossroads. And by the way, the site itself is about maybe a little less than a mile inland, and so they actually had a port uh, that they used, but the city itself was relatively uh, harder to attack until it was attacked. The
Yeah,
problem that Ugarit had is that in this period of our documentation between, we know, by the way, Ugarit was flourishing during the period of Mari in the 1800s, but here between 1400 and roughly 1200, the problem that Ugarit has is it's in between the superpower in the north in Turkey, the Hittites, and
yeah,
in Egypt. And so the Egyptians and the Hittites are for virtually that whole period are fighting over Syro-Palestine. And so Ugarit was at some points subject to the Hittites, and sometimes it was subject to the Egyptians. It was never fully independent, by the way. It couldn't be. And so even letters from Egypt at El Amarna, there's about 400 personal letters there. A significant number of them are from Syro-Palestinian uh, kinglets who are trying to stay on the Egyptian side. At the same time, they're also
right.
writing nice letters to the Hittites. And so they're trying to weigh and balance themselves. Well, it didn't work out very well. And so, for example, the Hittites and the Egyptians have a gigantic battle at Kadesh right around 1280, and the people of Ugarit were sort of caught in the middle of all this, it looks like, because they were, there's out of their publicly, they're speaking, they're on the Hittite site. Privately, they're trying to write the Egyptians, say, well, we really want to be with you.
Right.
And it didn't work out very well, especially when the Hittite kingdom begins to collapse. Then the people of Ugarit don't have any defense against the next wave of invasions.
It's
In
quite it's
fact,
quite interesting.
yes,
The more we study the history, the more it makes sense. Let me go back really quickly, and I want to. Sorry, I keep going on this topic, but
sure, that's fine.
I like to review really quickly about the seal, and
Yes,
then go back to the Ugarit in regards to adoption and some of the family issues or family information, family daily life from the Nusi per se.
yes,
The
yes,
seal cord staff. I'm reading from that you
right,
mentioned with Judah.
yes.
In the ancient world, legal identification was not by signature or especially a signed number as today. The seal was the most common form of identification. In Mesopotamia, inscribed cylinders were used and often worn around the neck, just like a chain today. Whereas
Yes.
in the rest of the ancient world, a scarab or stamps or seals were carved in the intaglio or disc-shaped bit of stone, usually decorated with some of the sort of simple pictures and occasionally with an individual's name and or position. These were often pierced so as to be worn somewhere on the body, often on the neck, on the cord. On a cord, probably referred to in this verse. Stem seals are
Yeah.
attested as early as 7 millennium BC. Neolithic period, cylinder seals made their appearance in the early 4th millennium. So that means that the staff of, so when you read it, right? Let me read the
Yes.
paragraph. The staff of that Judah leaves with Tamar must have also been distinctive and capable of identifying the owner. One possibility is that it was the staff that designated the head of the family, which I agree with that. Akkadian
Yeah.
Hatu, and the reason I'm bringing it up because you study the Akkadian. Akkadian Hatu is used for the scepter of a king, but also for the shepherd staff and the staff that serves as the insignia or office for important people. Now, that's really cool because
Yeah.
then when we compare that with the Bible, now I understand why God, if we are, okay, so this is my spiritual interpretation. If we're reading the book of Genesis, in which God is the potter, he's creating us and we are basically mud.
Yeah. Dirt people. Yes.
That's right. With 70% water, mud,
Yeah.
literally. And now he breathes on us, is his seal. We are set aside for him. That makes sense why when
Yeah.
Yeshua resurrects, now the body is being restored back as a new creation to,
Yeah.
to be the seal of God. But we need to handle ourselves in holiness according to God's definition.
Yeah. We should act like it.
We
Yeah.
should.
Act like we're sealed.
So I find this so amazing how the Bible does use the culture of its time in order to bring you the message of what God wants for us to be.
Yeah. No,
Do you think? So the question is this. So this actually helps us more understanding the need to understand the cultural background of what we're reading.
oh, it just amplifies it and matures it. So, in Ephesians, when it talks about us, being sealed by the Holy Spirit, it's like, oh, what does this mean? It's more than just a stamp of approval. We've got the royal seal. So even though we're dirt people, we can walk into the holy place
Yeah.
and say, "Hi, Daddy," and we can sit down with with special privilege. Uh, you know,
Well,
uh,
what's interesting is Passover is really all about that. Passover is not for slaves, it's for free people. That's what
right, exactly
we
right.
lean. That's the whole message. Freedom.
In fact, I think I might have mentioned this before already, but I think the prohibition of tattoo is the prohibition of marking someone as a slave, and
I
so
agree.
the last thing you want to do is to wear an orange jumpsuit today, or something that makes you look like you've been incarcerated, and
Yeah.
so
Especially apotropaic worship, the underworld deities and the way that tattoos, for example, many people don't realize that a lot of the tattoos they were back in the day was to honor the dead. It's like
well,
slashing your bodies too. Same thing.
yes, and it's interesting. Now I'm gonna push back on part of that. I know that in Leviticus 19:28, tattoo is connect. It's with those others, but I think that especially in Leviticus 19 and elsewhere, um, the prohibitions seem to be, from our standpoint, sort of random. You look at Leviticus 19:3, it says, I think it talks about honoring your parents, and then it's something about worship. And those two things are at least fundamentally unrelated in terms of being a subject. They're
Uh-huh.
related in terms of wanting to. And so, the prohibition of tattooing is there with the cult of the dead in 19, but it's not there in Leviticus 21:5.
Correct.
And there's
Yes.
there's no other. So I don't. There's
The,
no evidence in Mesopotamia or anywhere else of tattooing having anything to do with anything other than being marked as a servant to somebody else.
Oh, I was just going to mention that.
Yeah,
So maybe that's really the message, that we're not slaves to them.
right.
We are
Exactly
now
right.
servants of God. So that I think I learned that from man, the book, the gentleman you recommended that I'm trying to find. Give me a second.
Yeah.
Um, which one? Rhetoric? Nope. What was the name of that book? The gentleman for Egyptology.
Oh, Hoffmeyer,
Yeah, Hofmeyer. He has a little book here in the book on the Egypt.
Israel in Egypt,
Yeah, and he
Yellow
mentions
Book.
there about branding
Yeah,
and tattooing as a
yeah,
sign of ownership.
yeah.
So that's why God doesn't want that, because we belong to Him and He already seals us.
Yes.
In the Roman Empire, they did the same thing to the gladiators and the slaves. They branded them.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly right. And so at what is the poetry in Isaiah 44 and I think 49, where God loves us so much, he's going to mark himself with us, you know. And so as you know, and of course it's poetic imagery, but it's and so it sort of transcends the whole idea of marking, where God's, you know, we're going to be right on his hands, just I suppose like the ancient Israelite wearing the tassels or whatever. Why do you wear the tassels next to your forehead? So you remember, so you think about them. uh it, it so
But
what is
but that's kind of interesting, because then now we have the connection with the worship of the dead, that it was prevalent in the ancient Near East
right?
and also in Egypt, but also the status of the message that God is trying to bring His people. You're no longer slaves. I mean, I really
Yeah,
do believe that's the reason why He told Israelites. That's why I wear the tehelet and the blue, the tzitzit, and I know why the Jewish people do. But many people today in Judaism, they don't really understand why the tehelet, the blue, is that important according to its cultural background of the day.
yes,
So,
yeah,
can you imagine psychologically how it would be for God to deal with 600,000 people that come out of Egypt, and they are living there for so long, and they're slaves in a slave mentality,
yeah,
and now they keep making mistakes, and God says, "Well, let me tell you who I think you are, a royal kingdom. You're not just anybody
yeah,
anymore. Don't put those tattoos. You're not slaves anymore. You're free
yeah,
people." I mean,
yeah,
that really brings an amazing message of a righteous God.
absolutely.
I learned this, and it's a little bit more about Egyptology, and you already told me that's not something that you really do,
Well,
but
I mean, I if I know something, I'll tell you. If I
yeah, yeah,
don't,
yeah.
I'll tell you.
But reading on the book, and I got to find that quote about, the, branding of slaves and stuff. But I was reading another one here. It talks about the slavery in Egypt, and it says Joseph, in regards to Joseph, according to Genesis 37:27 and verse 36, in chapter 39 verse 1, was sold to traders who took to Egypt, where he was sold to an official. As noted, Hayes believed that slave trading account for the presence at least some of the Semites in Egypt during the 12 and 13 dynasty. And he linked that to the Joseph story. Evidence
Right.
for slave trade is limited. However, further work in this area is needed. Interesting detail is the sale of Joseph is the price, 20 shekels.
Yeah,
In Genesis 37:28 is the average price for slaves during the half of the second millennia. That's really
yeah,
cool.
it's exactly right. The writer knows what he's talking about. And so you find that in the Hammurabi Code and in other places. That's the average going rate, and it doesn't change for until I guess later in the end of the second millennium. I think it begins to raise
Well, that,
because
that's really cool because it shows the continuity of cultures, although they spoke a different language, but there's certain things that were the same,
yeah.
which
Have I?
proves the Bible to be right. So Kitchen was right in a way. You
Yeah, I was
know,
going to say Kitchen is the one that you want to look at too. You can't. He's. I don't even know whether Kitchen's alive. He's got to be in his 90s now.
man, his book is hard reading.
Yeah, I know.
Man, that
and
thing. Oh my
and
Lord.
he's very passionate about his correctness. I'll say that in the nicest way possible. And
You mean
and he's
he's never
passionate.
wrong?
Yes, and but he's so well educated and well read that it's hard to imagine. He was actually a very kind, gentle man speaking to him, but yeah, he knew what he was talking about, and he was convinced of it. And of course, he would fight hard like a soldier against the anyone who
Yeah.
was of a different opinion. That's all I'm going to say.
Can you imagine having Mendenhall, Kitchen, Hillers,
Yeah,
MacArthur, and some of the other McCarthy, and I'm missing one that's really big one. Um,
yeah, for
the
treaties.
older guys
Yeah,
that were there from the beginning. I mean, these guys are trailblazers. I mean, in a
yeah,
way.
they sure were.
So okay, so let's get back.
All right,
We kind of being like a broad perspective today.
sure.
And the whole idea, Professor, is I want the audience to understand that when we study the Bible, like the way you and I would study scripture is a little different than the way a normal believer would. Not because we're better, it's just that we're thinking a little bit different.
Yes,
Um, I'm trying to encourage them to realize that the story, like John Walton says, was written for us, but not to us. That's so
yeah,
true.
yeah.
And like, for example, in your series about women in the ancient Near East, which was fascinating. I learned a lot of things I didn't know. You can read certain books, but the way you framed it, and you're trying to explain about daily life for women, and we have to finish that topic
Oh yeah,
eventually.
that's maybe another topic. Yes,
Yeah, and I think because when you look at the Bible, sometimes the women are put in a certain position
yes,
that, especially in the Bible, in the modern day feminist movement, they don't realize that the Torah was actually revolutionary in the way it treated the women
absolutely.
compared to
Yeah,
any other ancient culture.
yeah,
Night and day. I mean, talk about having more of a voice, having more of a protection. Uh,
yes,
Talk about equal rights, equity instead of equality.
yes.
But when we read the story of Joseph specifically, which is making a shift from the ancient Near East into Egyptian, people don't realize the culture shock in a way that Joseph would have encountered.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and
So
anybody from uh, uh, Syro-Palestine who comes into Egypt is going to have a culture shock because they're considered to be inferior. In fact, the Egyptians usually would describe them with the first term would be vile,
yeah,
and then they would talk about who they are, and so it, and Semites look differently. They smell different because they don't put on the same lotion. I mean,
yeah,
all sorts of things are going to be different, and so an Egyptian male would have a lot more makeup on, usually clean shaven, and the Semites, just the opposite. So they're going to stick out like sore thumbs, and so it's really important to try to figure out when the Semite dynasty of the Hyksos was in power and what that has to do with Joseph. And we really don't know yet. Everybody has a different opinion. I know Kitchen has strong opinions about it, but it seems to be waxing and waning about when this all was. But really, you're you, like we said before, you're opening up the Bible. It is a little intimidating, and I very much understand people who are a little averse to it because I always find that when I'm just casually talking to somebody. And the other day we were celebrating a family member's birthday at a restaurant in town here, and a young lady who must have taken one of my classes 10 years ago came up and said she was our waitress, and she was saying, oh, I had you for a class, blah, blah, blah. And I said, oh, great. What was it? Because, I probably had 4,000 students now. And she tells me, and she goes, I had a Catholic background, but you made us think that the Bible actually fit in a real context.
right,
And that's probably all that happened to her. But that even just that is such a dramatic culture shift where it's
yeah,
put in a real place. And I would do it. Here I am in a secular school, so I'm not paid to propagate my faith in the public arena. I can do it privately, but not in the public arena. So I'm
yeah,
simply, oh, we're going to read this ancient text, Hammurabi Code. We'll do this, and then we'll look at a biblical narrative. Then we'll go back to another text, and so it's just seamlessly in that. And for a lot of them, Catholic, Lutheran, or not even with any background. It's like, wow, I I, I didn't know you could do that. And
Yeah,
often they'll say, "Oh, I thought it was just a fairy tale." And sometimes I'll tell them, "Yeah, it actually is a fairy tale, but it's a true one.
right.
It's a
Well, I
good
think what
fairy
you
tale."
did, I think what you did was you placed the Bible in a real time and space, which,
Yes,
you
right.
know, and now it makes sense. Oh, there were real people. Also, Abraham was real. He lived in real time. And, you know, like for example, if you don't mind, let me share something that
Yeah,
I was teaching on I was doing a teaching in Shabbat service, and I was doing the Torah portion. It was the Torah portion for Abraham in Genesis 18. And when you go to verse
yeah,
14, and it says, it's actually talking when the angel is telling Abraham that
yes,
this time next year, where the season is Moed, which is an appointed time, they're going to have Isaac, right?
yes,
Well, you know, in Judaism, they have a book that's called Seder Olam, that is an order, the order of things. And they tell
yes,
you in rabbinical Judaism that Isaac was born in the spring, in the month of Nisan. Well, this verse actually says it if you understand the culture and the language. Watch. It says, verse 14. It's too difficult for the Lord and the appointed time, at the appointed time, Moed, I will return to you in the spring, right?
yeah,
But in every other version, this is the Lexham, so you know it's more accurate. But in other versions, it says literally at the time of life.
right.
Can you
And
expound on
that's
that expression?
yes, and that phrase uh, is is the time of life means the spring because that's when things begin to bloom.
Exactly.
That's
So
exactly what it means.
So that's interesting because now when you study, let me talk about tempo now. So that's the area that I've been studying for a while.
Yes, I
So you talk
noticed.
about
Yeah,
bikurim, the first fruits, right? And people don't realize, well, why do you have to have resurrection happen in the spring? And why do you have to bring your first fruits in the spring? Because that was the theme of the ancient world. It's like
that's
you go
right.
from death to life. So that
Yeah,
tells you, that's the proof that Isaac was born in the month of Nisan,
yeah.
in the month that eventually the Messiah will die and resurrect to bring resurrection. I
It
mean,
makes it makes sense to me.
so that means the birth of Isaac comes from a womb that is closed.
Right.
It's a supernatural birth that brings life. It's a message of resurrection from a dead womb to
Yeah.
life. That's the whole theme.
It's a precursor to the resurrection. I
So,
absolutely agree.
so everyone would have understood that in the time of Abraham over
Yes.
there in Canaan.
Right. Well,
Isn't
think
that
about it.
interesting?
I mean, if Sarah, her womb, if she really is 90 years old, her womb basically had been closed for 50 plus years,
Right.
you know. And so
But that is that
they knew that.
but that only goes to show you how we can read something in the Bible. If the Lexham didn't translate it in the English language, because I did this, I went to a congregation, and the Bible that I was using, it says at the time of life.
Right.
So I asked the question, what does that mean? Nobody knew. So then we found this particular version and says the spring. And then
Yeah.
everybody went like, oh, Isaac was born in the spring. Talk about opening the door for a deeper teaching about resurrection.
Yes, exactly right. No,
So this is what I mean. Is like what you studied in the Ugarit, by sharing it with us, it will bring light to it will bring light to what we're studying because Jacob lived in Laban's house for 20 years.
yeah.
Abraham came from Ur. I mean, it's only logical that we consider studying this area to understand more.
Well, it is only logical, but you still have to have an expansive mind to do it because, as you well know, uh, especially those of hosts who may be raised in a faith, we have a lot of preconceived notions, whether it's like a high church like Lutheran or Episcopalian or Catholic or whatever, you've got all of this preconceived notions, and you're jolting it by telling them, wait a minute, look at this, we can look at this as a new, fresh way. And no, we've always looked at it this way. That's how it was looked upon, by my clergy and their clergy. And so you're telling me that I can look at it in a different, more expansive way, and it's intimidating. And so I just have to realize, all right, maybe they're not ready today for this. And I
Yeah.
know that sometimes they're less than ready. They're going to fight back. And at that point, it's like, all right, let me know, let me know
Well,
when you're ready to hear.
yeah, well, that's really my challenge is how can I, um, how can I share with the audience? Because anything that I teach biblically, I use the engineers as a backdrop of the storyline.
Yes,
So it's like, for example, somebody says, well, you're not really teaching spiritual application. And I said, well, yes, I am. Because if I teach you what something meant originally, and we have the evidence, which Nulsi tablets,
yeah,
and the Rashamra, we have the Emar, and then we have the letters of Amarna, and we have all this information that only gives us insight into how they lived. Once
right.
you understand, for example, the garment of Joseph, people argue, oh, it's a garment of many colors. Well, that was really the least thing that it was,
Yes,
is what does the garment represent?
yeah,
And then you can go from there and how God now He's given us authority to do certain things. And we're going to encounter envy by those who are not there, who God has not chosen. I mean, but if you don't know the original content, it opens and it lends itself for 49,000 denominations and opinions.
Yes, and also I think that we are, to me, people who want immediate spiritual application. It's kind of like fast food. I'm
Oh,
hungry. Oh, I have 10 minutes. I can go to McDonald's or,
you said it, not me. Junk food theology?
but I'm not trying to belittle it, but the point is if I really want a full application, I have to do my homework and try and realize that I have to try to restore the context. It's been lost to us.
Yeah.
So we have to go back. Oh, it's in a different language. All right. Well, not everybody can learn it, the different language, but but I think especially those people who are native Spanish speakers are even better equipped because they are living in, obviously you're living in a bilingual culture. You're going
Yeah.
back and forth
It's true.
in a way that I don't have to in my context in Wisconsin. So you already know that you've got to learn
But
another
but
language.
but
So
even in the Spanish culture, there are different lingos
yeah.
within the language.
Oh yeah.
Like, I mean, there are words in Puerto Rico that are offensive. A Mexican can use the same word,
Yeah.
and it's offensive in Puerto Rico, and then Puerto Ricans can speak one word that is offensive to the Mexicans, and unless you know and they know where you come from, then you're not going to get offended, or you will.
Right.
I got
And
another
so
question.
yeah,
I'm really enjoying today because although we're
good.
going different topics, but
That's all right.
one of the things that I'm trying to do that the audience doesn't know, I'm actually learning from you. And one of the things that I'm learning from you is how to navigate the sea of information in a way that is not imposing but educating.
Yeah.
And one of the things that the audience that is watching, one of the things that I'm learning is how you're able to first recognize when you don't know an area and say it, or actually sympathizing with people who are not necessarily at the same level of understanding as you are in that area to bring them along. I mean, I'm a little bit impatient in a way. And I don't know how you did it at a secular school. So more props to you on that.
Well, I'm gonna say something about Rico. Is that I talk about you because I said, yeah, I know this guy that he's been studying ancient Near East pretty much on his own, for the last decade and a half. I said, but every book he shows me is rock solid. You're not showing me any fluff. Um,
Yeah.
he, if you're looking to me to give him approval, it's approval. Everything he's doing,
Thank you.
he's got all
Thank
the
you so much.
right stuff.
Well,
Well, you
well,
don't
you,
have to thank me. It's just true.
I'm grateful that in a way and indirectly, I was able to learn, for example, the way I build my library, right? So I'm using Milgram. You know Milgram, Jacob Milgram, right?
Yeah, of
I
course.
mean, I read, little joke. He has three volumes of Leviticus.
Yeah, I know. Who does that? But anyway, yes.
Okay. I read all three.
Oh, I haven't read all three.
I did. I don't remember anything I read. It's so far. It's
Yeah,
crazy. That was like
yeah.
15 years ago. But then after I finish, oh, here it is. They tell me he had this one.
Oh yeah, a little one.
It's the
The
little one of the three. And I go like, anyway. But what I did was he does a really good job presenting ancient Near East and all that stuff. I mean, I think really balanced in a way. Certain positions, I don't know.
Oh
But
yeah.
anyway, but what I did, I began to look into the bibliography. And my whole thing was, if he mentions something more than twice from one guy, I get that book.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, I did that with you when I was reading some of your articles. You go through your bibliography, and I'm thinking,
Yeah.
well, wait a minute. This writer cite this book more than 3 or 4 times. Clearly, that has to be a good resource for his thesis. So why don't I just read the book? You
Uh,
know?
you do exactly what I do. I
Oh,
pick up
cool.
an article. The first thing I do is I look at the bibliography. Who did they use? What did they use? In fact, I would do this with my students. The student starts writing a paper, and I said, before you write your paper, tell me who you're going to use. And they'll
Yeah.
give me a list of 10 sources or whatever. I said, 5 of them get rid of their fluff. It's an encyclopedia article from, you know, this or that, or Wikipedia or whatever. And so these are the good ones. And then sometimes they'll ignore me and sometimes they'll do it. But I said, if you got good sources, you're going to get good information. So you're absolutely right. Who does
Uh,
this person use?
yeah. I remember there was one article by this guy. I don't know if you know him, Michael Morales.
No.
He's really good, man. He has this book. It's called Cult and Cosmos, and another one, The Tabernacle Prefigured.
Huh.
It was a friend of mine who recommended him. It's Dina Dye. She's also a scholar, engineering scholar, and
Yeah,
she's a
you
friend of
mentioned
mine.
her before. Yeah.
And he did a good job, man. This guy. So what he did was he studied sacred space and ancient Near East and all that stuff. And what the gift that he had was connecting all the dots. So at the time, I was studying, ancient Near East and honor and shame and righteousness and justice, and I was studying them individually. Like I read Moshe Wainfield's book on righteousness and justice, amazing book,
Yeah.
and then I read David De Silva's book on honor and shame and some of the other stuff. But what he did, um, he began to formulate the connections. So I remember looking at the bibliography, and one of them, for example, this one right here, half of the page is all bibliography, right? And as I'm reading, oh, there it is, right here, this one. This is the paragraph. I don't know if you can see it, and that's the
Uh,
bibliography.
I can see it's
So
yellow, but that's all. I can't
yeah,
read
that
it.
means I'll actually read it once in a while. So as I'm going through the bibliography, I'm going like, wait a minute. No wonder so familiar. I read every single one of those books, but I
Yeah.
didn't realize I read them. So I'm thinking, not that I'm smarter than anybody else because I read it, because you have a lot of books too and you read a lot. But it's so rewarding to actually read an article from somebody else and you can say, oh, wow, the way he connected this to that, I never saw that before. And
Yeah.
that's really cool. And that's what intrigues me about this type of study.
Yeah. And you're right. Then it's how we present ourselves with it, because I'll tell people, well, I'll talk about the Bible. And I said, my goal is to help you understand what it means. The spiritual application is something that you wrestle with later on. It might not come out obviously when I talk about this or that, uh,
Yeah.
because to me, application is something that might come, you know, a little bit immediately, but then you chew over it through meditation. And to me, meditation is just thinking about God and thinking about His Word, and so the application might not come for a month, a week, 2 months, 5 years.
Well,
Uh,
that's actually
something that
happened
you
to me
learn,
because we follow the audience that I teach, that we follow the Torah. So for
right?
example, we keep the Sabbath. So I asked the question. There are certain customs in Judaism that are practiced for Shabbat, right? So I don't teach them unless I understand where they come from.
Yeah,
So, and that's illogical. Many people follow stuff
yeah,
they don't know why they do it. I don't want to be like that. I want to know
yeah,
why. So I began to look into why, how come Sabbath starts at night and not during the daytime, right? And then I started looking into what an ancient cosmology and what darkness represented with chaos in Genesis. And then I know what God is trying to convey. He's the one who brings order, light, not chaos.
yeah.
You see what I mean? But if I don't understand that in Mesopotamian history, I'm not going to see it now. Why should I light the candles? Go ahead.
Yeah, in the evening, and what does he say in Genesis 1? It's the evening and then the morning,
Right.
then the first day. So,
So, but you see now the candles, right, which is not a commandment. So why
right.
is the candle so important? Well, it's a rite of passage. It's a minimal phase, minimal. I forgot the word now, but it's like you making a distinction between profane and holy.
Yeah.
I'm going into sacred space. I'm going to a high level of holiness. Well, how would you know? Oh, when you see those candles lit, that's when you know we're going to another stage, another
Yeah.
sacred space.
No, that's really great. And to try to understand those things, you must have been trained well by mom and dad. You must have been the type that was constantly asking them questions. Why do we do this? Why do I have to do that? And
Well, actually,
it
to
pans
be honest
out.
with you, I was a baseball player and was a baseball coach. So I was always watching a personal story, right? I played for the Yankees,
I
and
remember. Yeah.
yeah, and then I was in Tampa for spring training, and there was this guy who was a good hitting instructor. I really wanted to learn from him. And I went to him one morning in spring training, early spring training. I used to get up extra early to go to his, because he used to teach the high paying prospects.
Was it Don Zimmer?
No,
No.
actually, no. I
All
saw
right.
him all the
Oh,
time, but I used to
yeah.
scout with his son, by the way.
Yeah.
Um, but I knew Don. I mean, I didn't know him as a friend, but he was there for spring training sometimes.
Yeah.
So this hitting instructor, he was always, and then after practice, I will grab a bucket and I sit in the batting cage watching him teach all of the prospects. So one day
Yeah.
I asked him, "Hey, coach, is it okay if you throw me batting practice someday?" Right? So yeah, I
Yeah.
could learn from him. Here's what he said. He said, "Well, man, I'm sorry, but I only teach prospects." I'm going like, what in the world? I'm a professional ball player. I'm not a prospect, but I got upset. I go back to
Of
my
course.
my hotel room, and I'm really in bad mood because this guy told me really I sucked. Okay.
Yeah.
But and instead of getting upset, I'm thinking, okay, what am I going to do? The next morning, I got up early. I got there and I saw what he did the day before in practice. So I got a batting tee, and I began to practice what he was teaching.
Yeah.
After practice, I will pull out a bucket. He wouldn't want to teach me directly, but it didn't mean that I could not watch what he's doing.
Yeah.
So I
Exactly
will
right.
sit the whole class and I will watch everything he did. I will go back to my hotel room and I will practice in front of a mirror, get in the morning and do it on my own. He saw me doing that for about a week. And I learned more by watching him.
Yeah.
So about a week and a half, spring training is about 2 or 3 weeks. About a week and a half, 2 weeks, he saw me being consistent. And he goes, "Hey, Rico, when do you want to get together? I want to show you something." I said, "Man, I'm good. I got it.
Yeah. No
I'm
kidding.
learning already." I mean, it was probably bad on my part because I kind of turned him down, but it was the principle
Yeah.
that
Exactly
although
right.
you turn me down because I'm not good enough in your eyes, that doesn't limit me from learning from you.
Yeah, but that's really great because you could have gone the other way and just given up.
Right. And
So,
then my temple teacher, Joseph Good, he's an incredible teacher. He sits down and we start, to be honest with you, sometimes a little taxing studying with him because he'll say, "Well, what about this thing? How come a ewe of lamb has to be of the first year? And how about the heifer? Well, how much is a heifer?" We spent about an hour figuring out how much a heifer weighed because we needed to know why so many priests needed to take care of a cow or a heifer. But we learn a lot.
yeah.
You know what I learned? That a lamb of the first year is only 8 days old.
Huh. 8 days.
After
Interesting.
8 days is 1 year. So now
Okay.
biblical age is different than the way we measure it.
Yes, exactly right.
But that's consistent throughout the ancient Near East anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I'm very grateful to have good teachers. I want to ask you, I don't know how much time I got. How much time are you giving me?
A few more minutes. Yeah. It's been an hour,
Puerto
so we're
Rican
good.
minutes or American minutes?
Yeah. What would be Puerto Rican? 2 hours?
Pretty
Uh,
much.
yeah,
About 10,
15 or so.
about
We
10
got
more
10 or
minutes?
15 minutes. Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
Let's talk about, you mentioned that, hopefully I remember now, resources.
Yeah.
As a scholar that you are, can you, because I've been telling people, for example, when I quote the Bible, I don't use the Strongs as a primary source.
Yeah.
I think it's valid, but
It's
in
very
my
useful,
opinion,
but it's old.
right.
Yeah.
In the movement that I circle, that I hang out with, one of the sources they use is the Two Babylon by Hislop. Are you aware of that book?
I've I've heard of it. I've never scratched or sniffed it
Well,
myself.
that's a telltale sign because he's supposed
Yeah.
to be talking about Nimrod and Mesopotamian stuff, and
Oh
you don't
no.
even know who the
Yeah.
guy is. So that
I
should be a
I
great sign.
no, I know of the book, but it's pretty old if I remember.
Yeah, and it's been discarded almost 130 years. It's like,
Well, the problem with the book already would be is that it was written before the advent of Mesopotamian studies. And so how could they possibly know any of this new stuff?
okay, tell us a little bit about that because what I'm trying to also, what I would like you to help me with is make the audience aware of a credibility by sources we study. Because if not, I've gained credibility with you as a researcher because of what I've quoted and you see me study, it gives you an idea where I'm at.
Right.
So,
Well, in the same way is that I mean, I had to achieve credibility by studying with somebody who was well known. But for example, when I write an article and I send it to a publisher or a journal or whatever, they'll have two other scholars who are blind reviewers usually look at the article and they have to decide one of three things. This is acceptable as is, go for it, go ahead and publish it. This is acceptable, but it's a little flawed. So send this back and have them do A, B, or C. Or this article is irredeemable. It's reject it.
peer
Um,
review, peer review.
yes, peer review. So it's a very long, detailed process.
Uh-huh.
And I've been a peer reviewer. I've been a blind reviewer myself, and so you go through this whole process, and so nobody's able to come up with um, off the wall ideas without being evaluated. It doesn't mean that they just, in other words, they just have to back up everything they're going to say. And so if I talk about, let's say, Nimrod or whatever, and there's all sorts of now new Mesopotamian stuff, it's like, the peer reviewer is going to look at my article and say, wait a minute, there's a lot that's been happening in the past 130 years.
Right.
Why haven't you looked at such and such and such and such? And so, when I wrote my dissertation, the first thing that my professor wanted me to do was to look at everything that had ever been written on this topic, and it wasn't just English; it had to be French or German or any or whatever language. And then when I was done, then I can come back and start trying to say something intelligent about this or that. So it's just really really difficult to go through, but
Yeah.
I have to realize that not everybody has the time or ability to do that. You obviously, for whatever reason in your life, you've been able to do that, and that's
Yeah.
really unique
Yeah.
to do it. Um,
Well,
and
I've been blessed that I have the type of job and
yes,
ministry to allow me the time,
right,
but it's a lot of time I spent.
of course it is.
I think the first 10 years, it was an average of between 6 to 10 hours a day. And
That's
my wife
amazing.
can tell you. I mean,
I,
and
I'm sure.
now I spend like 6 hours
Yeah,
and I still don't feel like I know anything, man. It's crazy.
I'm sure if I asked her, she'd probably say Rico who.
You know what she did one time? I remember, I remember when I started doing, I got the first article by Mendenhall and I read the article and it blew me away. Then I read that article by Lopez that I sent you. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it.
Uh-huh.
Did you like it? What do you think about it?
I haven't looked at it yet. I should.
Okay, whenever you have, let
Yes.
me know. Anyway, so that really blew me away. And I told my wife, I said, if because what it did, it answered a question that I had about First Corinthians 15 about the hierarchy of the kingdom, and that
Yes.
basically answered my question. So anyway, I told her, I said, if this is true, it's going to literally change my whole approach to the Bible studies. But I told her I need time, so I spent 6 weeks, about 12 hours a day, literally. And after 6 weeks, my wife got into the office because I would go to bed about 12:30, about midnight, 1 o'clock, get up around 6. I was so excited. And then she would never see me, because I'm in the office. And she just grabbed the pillow and she laid down in the office. She goes, well, I don't see you, so might as well. And I said,
Uh,
okay, I got to stop. I got to
yeah.
stop for a
Yeah.
little
She,
bit.
she was telling you something.
I know. So resources, I think it's important that the audience, I know it's a little bit off topic, but I really want them to understand what we go through as researchers to present the information.
Yes.
So if you were to, let's say I'm starting with you as your student, which I am, so and I don't have the knowledge of engineers. What will be the first two steps of recommendation to study? How to study?
You're already doing it
No, what
because
I'm
you're,
saying is,
yes.
if I didn't know, what would be your advice?
I suppose I would say make sure you have good parents who thought you had to think on your own and critically, and
Yeah,
that obviously has happened. And
yeah,
so, uh, and 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 as Christians, you've got to think in a humble manner, like, okay, I'm going to think critically. I'm not going to take anything at face value, but that's the historical method that I was trained. But it's also realized that there's always somebody out there who knows more than you do, and there's always something out there that's going to contradict what you know. And so you should be humble, you should be open, you should be, I suppose, what's the word I want to use? You just be you have to think in a critical
pliable.
manner,
We have
not
to be
not
pliable
accept
too. I mean,
anything, and you have to be ready to have your mind changed,
yeah,
even
that's true.
even theologically. And I'm not talking about the basics that have been core, beliefs over the past 2,000 years. But even then, I want to look at those and tweak them when it's
Yeah,
when it needs to be tweaked. But you have to be continually asking your questions, just like you are.
right.
Why do we do this? What more can I learn? Oh, my, and of course, to me, this is also a spiritual thing. That's not just an intellectual thing. I'm
I
learning
would agree with
about,
that. Yeah, I
yeah, I'm
agree.
learning about you, God, and this is, here we are 2,000 years after the fact, and there's been a severe breakdown in culture and memory and information, and what my goal is to try to recover some of that, and it's just
Yeah.
a portion of it, and it helps me understand better. And again, you brought up the word impatient, and that's really important one, because it's really easy to get impatient with
Yeah.
people because they haven't been trained to think about it in the same way. We've
What
been trained to think about these are rules and regulations, and so don't ask questions, just do it.
right.
uh, and you're asking, well, wait a minute, why? And you're not saying that to God. You're saying that to the people who've interpreted the text.
Right. I think my biggest issue is how to deal with people like you just said it. If you read an article, there's a blind peer review. In reality, they're trying to help you,
Yes, of course they are.
you know. Although you don't people don't like correction now. I get it. I don't like it either.
Oh, I
But
oh believe me, I just hated it to go through
yeah,
that process.
but it made you better.
Yep.
I think my biggest problem, for example, my passion is a temple.
Yeah.
I mean, I fall asleep and I just dream of the temple. I mean, it is my passion. But I learned to also learn about ancient Near East, and I'm equally passionate about it. What bothers me is when people have these objections and they don't even take the time to do the research, and within 2 minutes of what they're saying, it makes no sense. It's like, okay, how do I deal with somebody who wants to have an argument instead of having a peer review? But how can you have a peer review when somebody who doesn't know the topic?
Yeah.
It's so weird, you know?
It's difficult, and then again, to me it's ultimately a spiritual thing. God, you've brought this before me. How do you want me to act? Oh, I blew that one. All right, next. In
Yeah,
other words, it's ultimately not about the content. It's how I'm going to treat this person and bring them along, because it's really no different than any other aspect of your life.
it's
you
true.
know
I
uh
mean,
you know
that's been my experience with you is as we talk, right? And we exchange. And I've learned a lot about myself and I learned a lot about the way you process things. And it's helping me also be more patient with different people because, we understand that not everybody's researching this stuff. So I'm thinking I have to make a decision. Am I going to impose it or am I going to educate as best as I can, right? And understanding they're going to get mad at me because they never heard it before. They're going to push back. But
yeah,
if I know they don't do the research, they don't have the evidence to really rebuttal it. They're just going to they're going to look ridiculous doing it. So you're trying to basically put a little landing path, like a little pillow, so they don't look so foolish.
yeah. I
And that's the hard part. So lastly, you talk about the Strongs because it's old. I got it.
yes,
But why wouldn't you? I'm doing it for the benefit of the audience. Why
yeah.
would you, as a scholar, as a respected scholar, not use the Strongs as your primary source?
Oh, I do use it because first of all, like I've told you, I'm not a Hebrew scholar. I'm a Mesopotamian scholar who has been exposed to Hebrew, and so when I'm looking up a Bible passage, I will look up the Strongs,
As
and,
one of the
and
sources, though.
yes, but I'll use it to help me understand what's going on here, and then from there I'll start looking at a more modern understanding of things because Strong's, when Strong was made, they did not they they were just beginning to learn about the other ancient languages, and so that will mention something about Akkadian, but it really doesn't know much about it. And
Right.
so,
For
um,
example, sorry to interrupt you, Professor.
sure.
I just changed this whole thing, so I got to figure out how to do it now. Oh Lord.
Well, that's why your Lexum stuff is so
Right here.
spectacular
Right.
because it's updated all that stuff.
Right. Look, for example, people don't realize that in all the major logos resources, like
Yeah,
for example, Halot is one of the best.
yeah,
And they do quote the Strongs, but it's not the primary source.
yeah. And BDB was, though it's old, it's excellent. And
I,
so
I
all
like
that stuff together is just amazing.
I like this one. I like the new what is it called? The new international
Yes, or
dictionary.
I've got it in my basement down there, and I've got
And the
TW2 down there too. And so yeah, they're all useful.
and
And
the and the Anchor Yale Bible dictionaries. Wow.
right, yeah, and that's very good too. Um, and so, and who really was the brains, in my opinion, behind all this was Mike Kaiser putting
Right.
all
Oh, he
this stuff
was.
together. Well, he worked at Logos for years as the scholar in residence
Right, right, right.
there, and so he just really amazing, just a fountain of information, in my opinion.
So can
Uh,
I? So I like his books. I have some of the things
yeah.
is kind of, but
Oh, I know.
because I didn't really study those areas, I'm looking at it like that's kind of interesting, but I don't throw it out anymore. I just say let me leave it there for now. I'll come
Yeah,
back later.
yeah. That's exactly what I do with it. And unfortunately, since he's passed away, he's not. We can't interact with him.
Yeah.
But
Do you are you does Logos have any scholar there now?
I don't know. They probably do. I don't
Yeah.
know who it is. I mean, they do that stuff. But
So would you when I write my thesis, would you be my peer review?
I will be happy to look at it. It probably would be in an informal way because it depends
Yeah.
on on how it works. But yes, I'll be happy to look at it and see how bad I can make you feel. Yes,
Not a problem. Not a problem. Hey, listen, this has been great. Today has been kind of cool, more relaxed.
yes.
You're gonna pick another topic you want to really get into. But
Well, we
Ugarit,
can do something mutual because I really want to do something that'll be of interest and importance to you and your audience.
okay, okay.
As long as it's something that I know about.
No, gotcha. But we'll keep bouncing. What I do want to talk about next time, maybe a little bit more about MR and Nusi tablets
Yeah.
in
Oh yeah.
connection with the life everyday life of Jacob and Abraham, and make some
Well,
connections
it
there.
just so happens this last weekend I was at a school in Albuquerque where I did 18 hours of lecture on Mesopotamia and the Bible. So that's pretty
Nice.
fresh in my mind. It
Well,
was
where
pretty
was this?
intense.
When was this? When
It's
were you?
just this last weekend. I was at Trinity Southwest University, which is a small school. Stephen Collins, who's been the excavator at Tel El Hammam, who's convinced he's found Sodom, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, um,
I
but
like Collins. I like his
yeah,
books.
yeah, Stephen Collins is his
Yeah.
name. So, so this is all fresh in my mind. I was reading documents and looking at documents, and so we can
So
talk about adoption
yeah, let's
and
do that.
all
Let's do
sorts of
that.
other stuff.
And if you don't mind, I'll bring some of the things that I'm studying on that
Of
and make sure
course.
that I'm on the right path. Okay, so when do you do these type of um
Oh,
Reading class.
it's sort of hit and miss. Every 2 years, they have a schedule where they bring in an in-house person once a month
Okay.
to do seminars, and so every 2 years they do a course on Mesopotamia. So I've been doing it since about 2016 for
Oh,
them.
that's cool. Do you
Yeah.
have
So,
anything scheduled for the future that you know of? Any place else?
well, oh, right now I'm open at the moment, so something will come up, but nothing in the immediate
You know,
contact.
maybe we should do a Ancient Near Eastern and the Bible course on Zoom with the audience that I have. Will you be interested in it?
Let's talk.
It's a course. We can talk about it. It
Yeah,
could be via Zoom, maybe a weekend and do some classes. I've done it for the temple. We normally
yeah,
get between 100 150 people.
sure. All right, we'll talk.
But let me know if you're interested. And if
Yeah,
you do it again, like you did in Albuquerque, would that
yeah.
be open to somebody like myself? I want to go and
I don't know what they do with the material, but I can always ask.
no, that if I want to go with you to watch you, can that be possible?
Oh, I suppose
All right.
I
There's no spring training games over there, so you have to come to
yeah.
Florida for that.
By the way, I have a 1 minute Don Zimmer story for you.
Okay.
Okay. I'm 6 years old. So this is 1960. Don Zimmer had just been traded from the Dodgers to the Cubs. They were playing either an exhibition game or maybe it was one of the first games of the season. And and they were playing at the LA Coliseum before Dodger Stadium was built. So I'm walking with my parents back to our car from the LA Coliseum, and we're walking to pick up to go back to the San Fernando Valley. And so I'm just 6 years old. And in front of me, there's a gentleman with a baseball, and he's bouncing it up and down. And I don't know who he is. I'm just six. And I say to my parents, that man got a ball. And of course, that man heard me. He turns around. Well, Sonny, come here. And he whispers something in my ear and he gives me the ball. It had all the Chicago Cubs signed on it. It was Don Zimmer. He
Wow, that's cool.
super nice. And
Nice.
so I kept that ball for the rest of eternity. And I found out that his birthday is the same as mine, although he was born a little
Yeah,
bit earlier than mine. But anyway, so he was one of my favorite
cool
persons
story.
after that. So I'm glad to hear that you got a connection with him too.
Yeah, that was really cool. That's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah,
we had a chance to meet a lot of cool people.
yeah, I
All right,
bet.
my friend, Professor, thank you for your time, and I look forward to seeing you. When do you want to meet again? Next week?
I think next week, because of the holiday
Yeah.
season, that'll
Okay.
be tough. And so probably the week after. So let's
Sounds
negotiate.
great.
We'll talk about
It
it.
gives me time to go over the stuff, so I'll have something to say when I see you.
Well, that's probably a good thing for both of us.
You got it. All right. Thank you so much. Okay. All
All right.
right.
God
Hey
bless.
guys, thank you so much for joining me. It's always nice to have you, and thank you for joining our conversation and be part of this. I think it's important that we both learn together, all of us, not only myself but also you in the audience,
And me.
and, and study the
Yeah.
ancient Near East. Okay, guys,
Yeah.
study the ancient Near East. It will really blow your mind away when you study the Bible. It really
Yeah.
enhance your biblical understanding. Okay, shalom
Yeah.
to all of you. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.